Now in this demo, we're going to take a look at this scene and do a sketch as a way of implementing what we learned in this workshop. Okay, so I'm going to start things off by doing a few thumbnails. You'll notice in the first thumbnail, I keep it really basic, really simple. I'm just concerned here with like the basic shapes. I'm just breaking up that picture plane into the basic shapes just to give me a sense of the proportions and where things are. So in the second thumbnail, I've kind of guesstimated where I think the vanishing point is. And what you'll notice as a result of that, it kind of harmonizes the buildings or the shapes a bit more. They seem a bit more organized than in the first thumbnail. And that's one of the key things that I had mentioned before about establishing your horizon and vanishing points, because they really help to organize your space. In this third thumbnail, I'm actually combining all that I've established in the prior thumbnails. So now I have a sense of where the vanishing point is, where the perspective lines are going. And I've also have a sense of the basic shapes. So now what I'm doing is kind of building on that information that I already have collected, and now organizing the space in a bit clearer way. And also you'll notice that I've also changed the frame. It seems more like a portrait, and that's something I decided by exploring the prior thumbnails. So this shows you really the importance of doing just a few simple thumbnails. They really give you a good foundation to really start moving forward with how you develop your composition. Okay, so now I'm going to do the underdrawing for the ink sketch. Now, one of the most important things that I want you to pay attention to is the fact that I go from simple to complex. And I go from simple to complex in a variety of ways in terms of shapes, details, just the general composition. So you'll notice I go from big shapes to small shapes. So you notice that I focus on that main diagonal that's going from the mid left to the lower right. And that is very important because it really cuts the composition about a third and also drives a lot of the way that you enter the scene. And then you'll notice also that I start breaking down the picture plane. I'm seeing it as a flat surface, and I'm breaking, just like you would a jigsaw puzzle, I'm breaking it apart into these big shapes. And then I go in and work those big shapes and break them up into even smaller shapes. And that's when you go into details. But for now, I am not necessarily going into anything too minute, because in my mind, the whole purpose of the underdrawing is just to provide a guide for my ink work. You know, it gives me a certain level of freedom to not have to worry about certain things. Like, for example, proportion. Are my lines straight? Are my lines going in the right direction? Have I placed this window correctly? Have I placed this door correctly? Those are some of the things that you're alleviated from. You don't have to worry about that when you're doing your ink work. So I'm kind of thinking about what are the things I don't want to be thinking about when I'm inking, you know, and that's kind of the purpose of your underdrawing. You're not just doing a drawing and then drawing over it. You know what I mean? You're really kind of thinking about your process after this and what you want to free yourself from. So there's certain things you want to be able to enjoy with your inking, and you shouldn't have to be thinking about that. So that's what I'm trying to take care of now. So I'm establishing proportions. Proportions is very important. You know, the size of this, the placement of this, where does this go, where does this end, and so on. So I'm making sure that those are some of the main things that I'm establishing now. And as I said before, you know, when you're doing your sketch, you're not limited to just the drawing. You can make notes. You know, you can say, okay, you know what, remember to use this stroke here. Remember that the light is coming from that direction here. Remember that I'm going to do this when I'm drawing this window, when I'm drawing this plant. Remember, I'm going to use this texture for the leaves. Those are the types of information you want to put down. You're not just doing a drawing for another drawing. That's not the point of doing the underdrawing. You're really trying to establish a guideline for what your ink work is going to follow. And once you do this, you'll grasp the understanding of what your underdrawing is about. Because, you know, then you'll say, okay, you know what, I'll work out the details here. And in this area, no, I don't have to do that. You know, you realize that you pick and choose. You're selective about where you focus on with your pencil drawing. Because remember that drawing is a multifaceted activity. You're thinking about multiple things at once. You know, while you're drawing, you're thinking about you're sketching, you're thinking about proportions, you're thinking about light and shadow, you're thinking about structure, you're thinking about perspective, you're thinking about shapes, you're thinking about lines, you're thinking about values. There are all these things. It's really a complex activity. So, what you're doing is you're trying to address these different things in different ways and with different levels of emphasis. So that way, when you're inking, you can allow yourself to focus on what you want to focus on. Because at the end of the day, guys, you have to remember this is a fun activity. You want to have fun. You want to be able to relax. You want to be able to really enjoy the process. So the more you're able to focus on that, the more fun you'll have and the more enjoyment you'll get from this. Okay, so I started the inking. And, what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to share with you my thought process. I'm going to, give you some insight on the way I'm thinking while I'm drawing. What are some of the concepts I am addressing and what's really going on in my mind? Not just a verbatim, step-by-step narrative of every single thing that I'm doing, every stroke. Okay, now I'm drawing, So now, something that's very important, as I had mentioned before, I forgot which, I think it was in part 2, about simplification and appreciating the abstract. It is so important. I really can't emphasize that enough. Now, the reason why is because when you're drawing, there are two different perspectives you apply. You apply a perspective as the person drawing, and you're applying a perspective as the viewer of your drawing, you see. So you have to be thinking about what does this look like while you're drawing the thing, you see, so that way it can make sense. And this is where the draw what you see and draw what you know comes in, because you know what you're looking at, you know what you're drawing, but you have to be thinking also, what will the viewer see? Will they be able to interpret this? Will they make sense of this? You see, so what that leads to is finding the balance between not being too exact with everything, but still giving enough information so that the viewer can participate actively without doing too much work or being confused. You see, so how that applies to this? Well, what I'm doing is, while I'm drawing, I know that I'm being selective of what information I'm putting down. I'm not putting down everything, and I'm not even trying. I am abbreviating this. Your sketch is an abbreviation. It's a summary of what you're seeing. You see, so you're choosing what information to put down. Now, I deliberately change things. Like, for example, if you really, look at the image and look at my drawing, you'll notice that, hey, there are 4 doors. He put 3. Hey, there are 5 windows. He put, 4 of them. No, that line is not that. That's not my concern. My concern is creating a version of this view that is for the viewer to enjoy from my perspective. So 10 people can do this scene and come up with 10 different drawings. And that is fine. That's the beauty of this whole thing. That it's a creative experience. So, while I'm drawing this, I'm actually coming up with things, when I'm drawing this building or this plant, I'm thinking, okay, what leaves am I going to use? How am I going to capture these leaves? And I just do it in the moment. And while I'm doing it, I'm saying, hey, I like this. Or I may actually adjust it a little bit. That's a part of the drawing, and that's fine. You don't have to feel you have to get everything correct. And it's always a learning experience. After every drawing, I say, yeah, you know what? I like the way I did that. I could have done this way. Note to self, I will do that next time. You see, so it's a critical experience while you're drawing as well. And you should be reflective. And that's a very important part of growing and developing your skill, because you have to reflect. If you draw, if you sketch, if you create, and you don't reflect, it is not healthy for growth. It is not healthy for progress. All right. You have to look back on yourself. Look back at what you're doing and the lines you make. The way you move your hand, the way you grip the pencil, the way you create your strokes. Like here, I'm creating that little the road. In my mind, I'm saying, okay, these little strokes. How am I going to abbreviate that? Maybe I'll use half circles. I won't use complete circles because I don't want it to be flat. So I'm using these small C-shaped little strokes to actually create that impression. when I'm doing the sides of the building, I'm thinking to myself, the graffiti, am I going to draw that? I'll just leave that out. And those are the types of decisions I'm making in my mind. In another drawing, I may actually want to tackle that and say, I'm going to actually recreate this graffiti on the wall because I think it's an important visual aspect of the composition. You see, so I choose to develop what I want to develop based on what importance I want to give it in my composition. So some things is not necessarily formulaic. Like I this is what I do in every composition. No, I kind of approach each drawing with a different attitude, a different feel to see what speaks to me here. Do I feel like this is important to develop? Yes, okay, I'll do that. If it doesn't, I'll abbreviate it. I'll deliberately leave out information so it's not overly developed. I'm not saying much with it. I'm not letting it speak a lot in the work. And that's the kind of creative approach you want to take. You want to let the scene speak to you. Don't feel like you're a slave to what you see. Like you have to account for everything. You have to draw everything. You have to fill in every detail or it will not be. No, don't do that. I'm telling you, if you do 10 drawings of the same scene, people will have a different experience with each one that is different. And that is that's the beauty of this whole creative experience, that you're creating different versions of that scene that you're seeing. And something I've learned over the years is that you have to learn to trust yourself. I've had classes before and I've seen many instances where students will not do something and wait for my guidance. And then when I do share, they said, yeah, I was thinking that. You know what I mean? And I'm like, well, that's why you do it. So they were right. They were thinking the same thing all along. But for some reason, they doubted themselves. They didn't have the confidence. They didn't believe it was right or it would be the right thing to do. And they wanted my affirmation. They wanted my assurance. Like, yeah, that's the path. That's the route to take. And I've realized that it's something you have to just learn to do. You just have to just learn to trust your intuition, trust your artistic instinct. Your mind is saying, explore that, do it. Just try it. It's not, you're not losing it's not the end of the world, basically. Just take chances with your work, because that's where growth comes from. That's where discoveries come from. That's where you really learn stuff like, oh, so this is how you draw this. Oh, I discovered a cool way to sketch people. I discovered a really cool way to draw bricks. You just do it. Sometimes it will sound crazy. It will feel crazy. It will feel awkward. It will feel uncomfortable, but you just do it. Like, you see, like here where I'm doing the top of the drawing, I decided mid-drawing to actually use the roofs of the building as the edge of the frame. And I didn't know how it would turn out. But if you notice, the pencil sketch actually sketched the entire box. And while I'm drawing, I just said, you know what? Let me just try this. And I just decided to use the edge of the roofs as the contour. And what that does is it breaks it up, and it makes it a little bit more interesting to me. And those are the types of decisions that you have to make. Here with the roof, I'm actually using very similar strokes to capture the shingles of the roof as I did for the pavement on the road. Virtually the same type of strokes. I'm using these C's. The only thing that's different is that I'm actually turning the C backwards, and that's pretty much it. Now, something that's really important to address as well is to be aware of the size of your drawing. We do drawings of different sizes, right? Sometimes we do a small drawing, sometimes we do a larger drawing, but the point is, a small drawing will not yield as much detail, or it's just not possible to force as much detail in it as if you're doing a larger drawing. You see, so that's something that you will have to gauge and learn on your own by drawing over and over. You'll eventually start realizing, okay, it is not necessary, nor is it possible for me to recreate this amount of details in a drawing this size. It is not. And you know what's actually even more interesting? The viewer does not expect it either. All right. So that's another thing. You know, if you do really small drawings or if you do really large drawings, know that there's a different level of accountability there. And also depending on what you're drawing with as well. If you're doing a drawing, a larger drawing with a bold point, you know, there is not necessarily that much room for really fine details as opposed to if you're drawing with something fine, you know. So, and I mentioned that because here, where I'm working on the doors on the building, the side of the building, now, if you look really closely, they're really just single strokes and dots that I'm using to filling in the details. And you know what? It is enough, okay? Because this is something I've learned over the years, and this is something, if you're just starting, you will learn as well, that it is not necessary for you to put all the information there. And this is what I was referring to about the process of simplification, of learning to appreciate and embrace the abstract. It's just like with Impressionism, you know, things up close will look like blurs and crap. It will just look like random arbitrary lines, but it will pull itself together when you step away from it and see it as a whole. And that's the idea here, that I know that this building, the viewer will look at this within the context of the scene. They will not see these individual doors in isolation. If you saw it, then you'd be confused of what I drew. You'd say, what am I looking at? But because you're looking within the context of this drawing, your mind takes care of that. In other words, I have to just imply or convey, and you will conclude. There's a psychological aspect of it where the viewer takes over for you. They complete the race for you, basically. You know, so don't feel you have to fill in everything. All right. And if you're sketching, especially with ink, it's also very important that you keep things loose. If you notice that a lot of the contours, my lines are broken, you know, I deliberately do that because you see, when lines are completely straight and connected, it engages the viewer in a different way. It's almost psychologically that you're telling the viewer it is closed and what you have drawn is concluded and is definitive and it is what it is. But when there are lines that are broken, it engages the imagination a lot more. There's a lot more participation, especially for sketching. For sketching, it's very important that you especially leave lines loose and open because it engages the imagination more. Because after all, it's a sketch. It is not a finished drawing where you're trying to make it photorealistic. You're capturing every detail. You know, you're really just abbreviating. And by abbreviating, it's even more important that you keep your lines loose. You keep it a bit scattered, a bit open, you know, and that enables the viewer to come in and fill in the missing information. And your work is more engaging, more expressive, and actually says a lot more. So pretty much all the ink work is done. And if you'll notice, it looks pretty bland. You know, there's no particular area that stands out. And that's the whole idea here. Now, what I'm going to do now is just go in and start deepening some areas, making some outlines more bold. And as a result of that, just make the work a bit more visually appealing and visually interesting. You know, creating some contrast with the strokes, you know, varying the weight a bit, and this will add some interest. And also leave it a bit open if later on I decide, like, you know what, I want to apply some watercolor. So that's one of the reasons why I'm leaving it a bit open as well. Generally, if you know that you will apply watercolor to a sketch, try not to do too much shading with your ink. Leave it a bit open, let it breathe a bit, you know, leave your lines broken, and let the work kind of give some open space so that the viewer can actually go in and move through it, because that's really what will be happening. The viewer is going through the work, going from image to image, going from detail to detail, and it's almost like having a puzzle that enables the viewer's eyes to wander all through it. Okay, everyone, this was a really fun and compact learning experience. It was truly awesome, and I enjoyed going through some of these essential concepts of urban sketching with you. I hope you found it useful and was inspired in some way, and will leave with something that you can apply to your own work. So thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.